London, 1933. Fog coils like pale serpents around the iron skeleton of the West Side railway yard. A whistle cuts the night, sharp as a blade. A young woman, heiress to the Gresham and Company shipping fortune, vanishes between two freight cars without a trace. Her jeweled cigarette case lies in the mud, glinting like a dropped star. Scotland Yard calls it a tragic accident. But Hercule Poirot, sipping his chocolate at the Savoy, suspects murder. Chapter 1. The Disappearance at Platform 9. The fog that night was of the particular London breed known to railway men and poets alike. A thick, pearly mass that clung to every iron girder, every riveted plate, and turned lamps into indistinct golden smears. It muffled sound, but not scent. The odor of oil and damp coal dust lay heavy over the West Side railway yard. A smell at once industrial and strangely intimate, like the breath of a slumbering dragon. Two constables picked their way between stacked crates and barrels stamped with far-flung ports of call. Buenos Aires, Alexandria, Calcutta. The freight yard was the artery through which Gresham and Company's shipping empire pulsed, and tonight its lifeblood was late. The constables' boots splashed in puddles, their faces pale ovals under their helmets. Neither spoke. A whistle shrieked and was swallowed by the fog. At precisely 7 minutes past 10, a slim young woman, her fur-collared coat drawn tight, appeared at the edge of Platform 9. She paused, looked over her shoulder as if expecting someone, and then stepped briskly into the mist. That was the last time anyone could swear to seeing Lady Constance Gresham alive. At the Savoy Hotel, the rain sounded like a polite murmur against the tall windows of the Thames room. Hercule Poirot, impeccable as always in his gray spats and dove-colored gloves, sat with a small silver pot of chocolate before him. He had arranged the sugar cubes into a perfect pyramid and was contemplating them with the air of a man whose windows glowed faintly like watchful eyes. A crane loomed overhead, dripping water from its hook. In the distance, a locomotive exhaled steam in a long, mournful hiss. Inspector Japp was waiting under the eaves of a signal shed, his Homburg pulled low and his coat collar up. "Evening, Poirot," he called. "I wouldn't have troubled you, but this one smells funny." "All crimes smell funny, mon ami," Poirot replied, tiptoeing fastidiously over a puddle. "But some more than others. Tell me everything." Japp gestured toward the cordoned-off section of Platform 9. Lady Constance Gresham, 24, heiress to the Gresham and Co. shipping line. Had a row with her uncle about money and politics. Slipped out tonight without telling anyone. A railway porter saw her walking toward the freight cars. Next thing, gone. No body. No witnesses. "Ah," said Poirot softly. "When there is no body, there is often no crime. Or else a very clever one." He followed Japp to the edge of the platform. The rain made the boards slick. Under a tarpaulin, a constable produced a small evidence bag. Inside lay a jewel-encrusted cigarette case. Initials CG picked out in rubies. Poirot examined it delicately with his gloved fingers. "This was found where?" "In the mud, between the rails. And this? Poirot pointed to a second bag containing a torn glove of soft kid leather. Also hers, according to her maid. Looks like she dropped 'em in a hurry. Poirot bent closer. A faint scent rose from the glove. Lilac with something sharper beneath, like bitter almonds. He frowned. Curious. The glove is hers, but the perfume? Not at all. Lady Constance favors Violette, not this. Jap shrugged. Could be contamination. Could be nothing. Could be. Gave me the shivers. Poirot fixed the man with a penetrating gaze. Describe the second lady. Was she perhaps taller? Shorter? Couldn't rightly tell with the fog. But she walked heavier. Like a servant, not a lady. Poirot tucked the ticket stub into an envelope. Merci, mon brave. You have been most helpful. Inside the signal shed, Poirot examined a map of the yard. So, we have Lady Constance, a second woman dressed as her, a mysterious ticket to Dover, and the scent of an alien perfume. Tell me, Jap, who benefits from Lady Constance's disappearance? Jap snorted. The usual, Uncle Alfred. She was set to inherit if she married. If she's dead or gone, he's rolling in it. Then there's the maid, Clara Smythe, dismissed last week. Plenty of motive. Or the poet fellow, Julian Morel. Radical type. They say she was going to bankroll his revolution. Poirot smoothed his mustache. Ah, romance, money, politics. Always the same trinity. But I tell you this, mon ami. This crime, if crime it is, has been staged with artistry. Look, he pointed to a faint streak on the floorboards. A smudge of blood no larger than a coin. One does not lose a glove and a cigarette case and leave such a neat little clue, unless one wishes it found. Jap squatted to look. Could be she slipped. Could be, said Poirot. But you and I know better. The investigation continued past midnight. Poirot, immune to the damp, measured distances with a small silver tape. He questioned a signalman who had heard a woman's voice shouting, "Wait!" just before the 10:30 whistle. He examined the undercarriage of the freight car with a pocket torch. He even noted the peculiar pattern of footprints in the mud. A lighter pair leading from the platform to the tracks, a heavier pair leading away. At last he returned to Jap, who stood stamping his feet for warmth. Well, the inspector demanded. Poirot held up a gloved hand. Patience. The little gray cells require order. First, Lady Constance is missing. Second, she quarreled with her uncle. Third, a false softly. This is not merely a disappearance. This is a performance. And every performance requires an audience. And a stage manager. Chapter 2. The Gresham Legacy. Distant chimes of a clock striking midnight. Echo of a taxicab over wet cobblestones. London by night glitters differently for the wealthy. As Hercule Poirot's cab turned off the Strand and crossed into Belgravia, the damp gaslight of the railway yard gave way to electric lamps glinting like polished pearls above immaculate terraces. The rain had softened to a drizzle, as if reluctant to fall on such genteel avenues. Here, in a crescent of cream stuccoed houses, stood Gresham House, its Art Deco facade a geometric proclamation of power and modernity. Its brass plaque shone under the street lamp. Its windows glowed discreetly behind heavy curtains of midnight blue velvet. Poirot stepped out, adjusted his gloves, and surveyed the entrance. Eh bien, he murmured. The stage changes. The play continues. Inspector Japp joined him, stamping his boots. Nice digs. Must be rolling in it, this lot. The door swung open before they could knock. A butler, tall and expressionless as a metronome, regarded them. "Monsieur Poirot, Inspector Japp. Lord Alfred will see you now." His voice had the unctuous calm of one used to crisis. Inside, the air was warm, scented faintly with sandalwood. The hall floor was a black and white marble chessboard. A crystal chandelier hung like a frozen waterfall. Above the mantel, an enormous ship's wheel had been mounted, the symbol of Gresham and Company's maritime empire. Poirot's eyes lingered on the polished brass plaque beneath. SS Constance, launched 1910. "A sentimental touch," Poirot murmured, "to name a vessel after the child, but perhaps also a claim." Lord Alfred Gresham awaited them in the library, a room of dark oak paneling and brass lamps shaped like sextants. He was a tall man in his late 50s, still broad-shouldered but gone a little soft and inexhaustible. Her father, my late brother, left her a considerable trust. But she is young, impressionable. She has lately been keeping company with undesirable persons. "Such as Julien Morel?" Poirot asked. A flash of distaste crossed the older man's face. "That poet, an agitator more like, preaches revolution to factory hands and flirts with my niece over cocktails. I forbade her to see him. She paid no heed." Poirot inclined his head. "It is sometimes difficult, n'est-ce pas, to guide the young when the heart is involved. Did you argue with her?" Lord Alfred's hand tightened on his glass. "She threatened to ruin us. Said she would expose private business matters in the press. Some nonsense about contracts with Bainbridge Shipping. She does not understand the realities of commerce. And you, milord, you are her legal guardian? Until she marries or reaches 25. She is 24. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "So, if she were to disappear, if, heaven forbid, she were dead, the fortune returns to the family." Lord Alfred's head snapped up. "I resent the implication." "No, no," Poirot said soothingly. "I imply nothing. I ask only." Japp flipped open his notebook. "When did you last see her?" 3 days ago. She came here, demanded funds for some scheme or other. When I refused, she stormed out. Any idea where she went tonight?" "None." "Did she have enemies?" Lord Alfred smiled thinly. "An heiress always has enemies. But she also has protectors. I assure you, gentlemen, Constance can take care of herself." Poirot's gaze drifted to the mantelpiece. There, in a silver frame, stood a portrait of Lady Constance at 18, a striking girl with pale hair and bold eyes. She wore a string of pearls and a faint, mischievous smile. But something about the frame arrested him. The photograph beside it had been defaced. The male shall of course continue our inquiries. Lord Alfred's bow was perfunctory. "Do what you must." As Poirot and Japp stepped into the hall, Poirot's hand brushed the banister. He noted a faint smear of coal dust, out of place in this immaculate house. Outside, the drizzle had become a fine mist. Japp lit a cigarette. "Well, he's our man, isn't he?" Poirot shook his head. "No. Too obvious. Too soon. The murderer who presents himself at the start is rarely the murderer at the end. But our lordly friend is involved, certainement. The smell of the perfume in his note. It is our thread, mon ami. We must follow it. The cab rattled away from Gresham House. Poirot stared out at the wet city, its neon signs reflected like smears of blood in the puddles. "Do you know what interests me, Jap?" he said at last. "What's that?" "This house of power. This uncle with his ships and his butlers. And yet the key to the mystery may be something quite small. A glove, a ticket, a scent, a photograph scratched. The small things, they always betray the large." Jap exhaled smoke. "And the double the railway worker saw?" "Ah, yes, the double. Perhaps the maid. Perhaps another woman entirely. But someone was playing Constance tonight, and not for amateur theatricals. We must find out who." They rode in silence a while. Poirot's fingers played with the little envelope containing the ticket stub. "Dover," he murmured. "Always Dover. The escape hatch of England. But perhaps Our Lady did not run at all. Perhaps she was made to appear as though she had run." Jap glanced at him. "You think she's still in London?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Mon ami, she may be nearer than either of us imagines. But first we must call upon Mademoiselle Clara Smythe, the dismissed maid. She will have much to tell." Jap later defined. "The graduate as well." Poirot leaned back, closing his eyes. In his mind, the pieces shifted like chessmen. Said Poirot. "A lady's maid knows everything, the secrets, the habits, the little indiscretions. If someone wished to imitate Lady Constance, who better to advise than the one who dressed her?" The door opened with a groan. Clara Smythe herself appeared, a pale woman in her 30s with dark hair pinned back hastily and eyes that darted like sparrows. She wore a plain gray dress and no jewelry. When she saw the inspector's badge, her shoulders stiffened. "I've done nothing wrong," she said quickly. "I told the yard everything last week." Poirot inclined his head. "Mademoiselle, I am Hercule Poirot. This is Inspector Jap. We ask only a few questions. May we enter?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. The hallway smelled faintly of boiled cabbage and polish. A clock ticked somewhere in the house. She led them into a sitting room furnished with worn chairs and a crocheted tablecloth. "You were Lady Constance's maid," Poirot began softly. "For 4 years, until last week." "And why were you dismissed?" Clara's lips tightened. "She said I was stealing. I wasn't. Someone planted those earrings in my drawer." "Which earrings?" "Diamond drops. Belonged to a mother. I would never." Her voice broke off. Poirot nodded gravely. "It must have been distressing. You were close to her?" "She trusted me. Told me things she wouldn't tell her uncle. She was planning to leave London. Said she couldn't breathe in that house. But she never said when." Jap leaned forward. "Did she ever mention Julian Morel?" A flush rose in Clara's cheeks. "The poet? She was infatuated. Thought he was some kind of genius. He only wanted her money." "Did she mention Bainbridge?" Poirot asked. Clara's fingers twisted in her lap. "She hated Bainbridge. Said he was trying to ruin her father's company. Said her uncle was in his pocket." Poirot let the silence stretch. "Tell me, mademoiselle, on the night of her disappearance." "Of course," Poirot replied. "Everyone hides something. But is it the thing we seek? That is another question. Julian Morel received them at a cafe in Soho that reeked of coffee grounds and cigarette smoke. He was a tall, narrow man in a threadbare velvet jacket, his hair a dark tangle, his eyes fever-bright. A stack of dog-eared manuscripts lay on the table before him like offerings. When he saw Poirot, he smiled with ironic charm. So the great detective comes to interrogate the poor poet. Will you cuff me now or after my espresso? Poirot sat, unruffled. We prefer first the espresso, then the truth. Japp remained standing, arms folded. Julian lit a cigarette with languid grace. If this is about Constance, I already told the Yard. I haven't seen her in a fortnight. But she planned to meet you, no? Poirot asked. He exhaled a thin stream of smoke. Once, perhaps. But her uncle threatened to cut her off. Then some mysterious benefactor offered me a sum of money to leave England. I accepted. Conscience, you see, is a luxury for men with incomes. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A benefactor? Who? Julian shrugged. A man in a gray coat. I never saw his face. He left an envelope of cash on the table at the Café Royal. Said only, go to Paris, forget her. I went to Dover, then turned back. Couldn't bear it. Japp's pencil hovered. You've still got the cash? Most of it. He tapped the manuscript stack. Paid my rent. Poirot leaned closer. Did you know Lady Constance intended to expose her uncle's dealings with Bainbridge? Julian's eyebrows shot up. She said she'd bring down the whole rotten cartel. She had documents. I begged her to burn them. She laughed. And the night she disappeared, I was here, writing. Poirot noticed a cufflink on the floor beside Julian's boot. Gold, with a tiny fleck of dark fabric attached, as though torn from a coat. He bent, retrieved it delicately, and turned it over. Yours? Julian looked startled. I thought I'd lost that. Thank you. Rivals, n'est-ce pas? Competitors. Nothing more. And yet your wife owns a brooch shaped like an anchor. Bainbridge blinked. What of it? One was found in a freight car at the West Side Yard. His jaw tightened. My wife's jewelry is none of your concern. Poirot raised an eyebrow. It is of concern if it lies beside a smudge of blood and a torn glove. Bainbridge leaned forward. Listen to me. I had nothing to do with that girl's disappearance. She came to see my wife about some nonsense, her father's contracts, but she left unharmed. Poirot tilted his head. So you knew she would visit? No. My wife told me afterward. Did you or your wife travel last night? We were at a dinner party in Mayfair. You can check. Poirot rose. We shall. Merci, monsieur. As they left the building, Japp muttered, I'd like to see that wife of his. And we shall, Poirot said. But first we must examine Lady Constance's diary, if we can find it. The rain had stopped by the time they reached Poirot's flat. Sunlight broke weakly through the clouds, glinting on the puddles like tarnished silver. Poirot laid out his findings on the table, the ticket stub, the glove, the photograph of Constance and the defaced man, the duplicate cigarette case, the cufflink, the anchor brooch. Regarde, mon ami, he said to Japp. Our collection grows. But what does it tell us? Lady Constance plans to flee. Someone pays her lover to leave. A double appears at the railway yard. A brooch, a glove, a scent, a ticket to Dover. Each clue alone means nothing. Together, he touched his temples. Together they whisper. Jap scowled. Whisper what? That Lady Constance's disappearance is not a simple kidnapping, but a carefully staged drama. But who is playwright? Who is actor and who is victim? That we have yet to see. Poirot picked up the photograph again. They moved like a shadow. Poirot whispered, "We shall find you, mademoiselle. The train cannot run forever without arriving at its destination." Behind him, the mantel clock ticked softly. Another day of inquiry awaited. But tonight, the little gray cells danced in silence, arranging and rearranging the puzzle pieces into ever more intricate patterns. Chapter 4. The Ticket to Nowhere. The rain had finally cleared by morning, leaving behind a cold brightness that made the soot-streaked brickwork of the West Side Railway Yard look almost respectable. Steam rose in ghostly plumes from the locomotive shunting to and fro, while porters in flat caps shouted to one another across the clatter of wheels. Above it all, the iron girders of the great roof glistened with moisture like the ribs of some enormous, sleeping beast. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of Platform 9 again, his patent leather shoes polished to a mirror sheen in defiance of the grime. Inspector Japp hunched beside him, rubbing his hands together for warmth. A cold wind threaded its way through the yard, bringing with it the faint smell of tar and salt from the nearby river. "Never thought I'd be back here so soon," Japp muttered. "You'd think we'd scoured the place clean last night." No, said Poirot. "Last night we looked. Today we examine. There is a great difference." His eyes moved slowly over the tracks, the platforms, the lines of freight cars. "Every crime scene is like a stage, mon ami. One must return in daylight to see where the scenery does not fit." They were met by a nervous-looking yard foreman who wiped his hands on a rag. "We've cleared out the freight car you asked about, sir," he told Japp. "It's empty now, but you're welcome to poke about." Poirot inclined his head. "Merci. And you will also tell us, please, which trains departed last night for Dover?" The foreman blinked. "Dover? None. Strike on the Southern line. Everything was rerouted or delayed." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Ah. Then our ticket stub is not for a real journey, but a false trail." Tin flask, a crumpled railway timetable, and a brooch shaped like an anchor, its silver tarnished but unmistakable. Japp let out a low whistle. Bainbridge's wife, no doubt about it. Poirot nodded. "We are on the right track, as you say in English. But why hide a brooch here? Unless—" He ran a gloved finger along the recess. "Unless this compartment was used to conceal something. Or someone." Japp straightened. "You think Constance was in there?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "It is possible. A clever plan. The heiress disappears, leaving behind glove and case. Meanwhile, she is smuggled out in a freight car, hidden in a compartment. But where does the train go? Not to Dover. Not last night. Perhaps not at all. Perhaps the car was simply moved to another siding." He rose, dusting off his knees. "We must check the movement records, mon ami. But first, let us speak again with the witnesses. Perhaps one has remembered more." The railway worker from the previous night, a wiry man named Harkins, met them by the signal tower. In daylight, he looked less like a ghost and more like a man who had seen something he wished he hadn't. "You're sure you saw two of her?" Japp pressed. "As sure as I'm standing here. One went up them steps to the tower, one went along the platform." "Could the second have been a man in disguise?" Poirot asked mildly. Harkins scratched his head. Walked heavy like. Could have been. Fog was thick. Did you hear anything unusual? Whistle blew, train hissed, usual racket. Thought I heard a woman call, "Wait," but might have been a gull. Poirot studied him. And after that? Harkins hesitated. I saw someone carrying a trunk, big one. Didn't think much of it then. A trunk, Jap said sharply. Where? By the sidings. Couple of porters lugged it into a boxcar. Didn't see who gave the order. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A trunk. Big enough perhaps for a lady to lie in. Harkins swallowed. Service, but moved to a private siding near the river at 11 p.m. Out of service, Poirot repeated softly. How convenient. Jap leaned over his shoulder. You think she's there now? No. By now, whatever was inside has been removed, but it tells us the plan. The false ticket to Dover, the double, the glove, the case, the brooch, all part of the stage dressing. The real action was elsewhere. He tapped the paper. We must find out who authorized this movement. Later that afternoon, they tracked the paperwork to an office at the far end of the yard. The clerk on duty, a bespectacled youth with ink-stained fingers, blinked nervously as Poirot's gaze settled on him. The order came through late, he stammered. Signed by Mr. Gray of the company. Mr. Gray? Jap asked. Never heard of him. The clerk swallowed. New name. Started last week. Paid cash for the siding. Poirot smiled faintly. A man with no face, no past, and a color for a name. Très commode. Did he leave an address? No, sir. Poirot thanked him and left, his mind already racing ahead. In his pocket he still carried the ticket stub. He took it out and held it up to the light. The ink had blurred, but a faint watermark showed the crest of a private shipping line. Not the Southern Railway at all. Mon ami, he said to Jap. This ticket is not for a train. It is for a ship. Jap stared. A ship? Oui. A private packet at the river docks. Our adversary planned to smuggle Lady Constance not by rail, but by water. They drove to the river as dusk fell, the sky turning a bruised purple above the warehouses. The Thames lay broad and dark, its surface broken by the lights of moored vessels. Dockhands moved like shadows, loading crates onto barges. The smell of salt and tar was stronger here, mixed with the reek of mud. Poirot led Jap down a slippery flight of stone steps to a lower wharf. This is where the private packets dock. See? No customs. No questions. Jap scanned the yard. The movement orders. The ticket. The photograph. The brooch. He stared at them as if willing them to speak. Consider, Hastings would say, the psychology, he murmured. Lady Constance is young, rebellious, but not foolish. She plans to elope or expose her uncle. Someone offers her lover money to leave. She disappears at a railway yard, leaving clues behind. Meanwhile, a hidden compartment, a trunk, a ship. It is too neat. It is a puzzle arranged for my eyes. He touched the brooch. And now our next step must be Bainbridge's wife. She holds the key, I think. He sat back, eyes half closed as the clock ticked toward midnight. Outside, the city murmured, the faint clang of a bell, the hiss of a distant train, the low thunder of the river. Poirot's mustache bristled. Tomorrow, he whispered, we shall pull one thread, and the tapestry will begin to unravel. Chapter 5. Shadows of the Poet. Julian Morel lived not among the marbled crescents of Belgravia, but in a converted warehouse on the south bank, a labyrinth of narrow lanes and brick walls stained with decades of soot. Here, the city's pulse beat differently. A jumble of cafes, printing presses, and clandestine clubs where intellectuals argued over absinthe and pamphlets. The fog was thicker on this side of the river, clinging to the arches like wet wool. Poirot and Japp arrived just as dusk turned the Thames into a sheet of pewter. A single lamp burned above a door painted dark green, its brass knocker shaped like a theatrical mask. Inside, the air smelled of ink and stale tobacco. Books and papers lay in drifts across the floor. A phonograph hissed faintly in the corner, a Chopin nocturne warped by scratches. Julian Morel stood at the window, his hands behind his back. He was tall, spare, with a poet's hollow cheeks and a shock of dark hair falling over his brow. His clothes, a velvet jacket and a cravat of deep wine red, looked more suited to a drawing room than a warehouse. Yet his eyes were restless, darting from Poirot to Japp with a flicker of defiance. "You're a difficult man to pin down, Monsieur Morel," Japp said as they entered. "I'm a poet," Morel replied smoothly. "We live by our own clocks." Poirot bowed slightly. "And yet even a poet cannot live outside the laws of the land." "Laws?" Morel's smile was quick, ironic. "Ah, you've come about Constance." "Just so. She is missing." "I read as much in the morning papers. A tragedy." But his voice lacked conviction. Poirot stepped closer. "Mademoiselle Gresham was your friend, perhaps more than a friend. You corresponded, yes?" Morel glanced at the desk piled high with letters. "We exchanged words, if that's what you mean." She had a wreck. Morel's hands clenched. "But he left it on my desk and walked out. I haven't touched it since." "Then why not go to the police?" Japp demanded. Morel laughed bitterly. "You think they'd listen to a poet accused of seducing an heiress? No. They'd hang me first and ask questions later." Poirot studied him. "Where were you on the night of her disappearance?" "Here, alone, writing. I have no alibi." He spread his hands. "Convenient, isn't it?" Poirot wandered through the cluttered room, noting details. A scarf of pale silk thrown over a chair, a vase of wilting violets, a thin film of coal dust on the window-sill. On the mantel lay a slim leather-bound diary. He opened it, scanning the neat handwriting. "These are Constance's?" he asked. "Yes. She gave them to me to keep safe. But some pages are missing, torn out 2 nights ago. I found the lock broken." Morel's voice shook. "She wrote everything in there. Names, places, dates. If someone has them, then someone holds a very dangerous weapon," Poirot finished. He slipped the diary into his pocket. "With your permission, I shall examine this." Morel nodded, shoulders slumping. "Do what you like. Only find her." Poirot paused at the door. "One last question, monsieur. Did Constance mention any plan to leave England?" She said she'd go to France if her uncle tried to stop her, but she didn't say when. She was afraid.
Morell's voice cracked.
Afraid of him.
Of Lord Alfred.
Of all of them.
He turned back to the window.
You don't understand, Monsieur Poirot. Constance was playing a game she didn't know the rules of.
Poirot's gaze softened.
Perhaps. But I know the rules. And I will not let her lose.
Outside, the fog had thickened, swallowing the lamps in gauzy halo.
Over. Could she have hidden them at the yard?
Or with the maid, Clara Smythe? We must find her immediately. That night they tracked Clara Smythe to a boarding house in Whitechapel. She was a slight girl with quick eyes and a nervous manner, her hands perpetually twisting a handkerchief. She admitted at once that she had helped Constance slip away from Gresham House the night before, disguised in a dark cloak. She was frightened, Clara whispered. Said she'd meet someone at the railway yard who would take her to safety. Gave me money to pack her things and follow later. Who was she meeting? Poirot asked gently. I don't know, sir. She only said, an old friend. Poirot studied her. And did you see a second Constance that night? Clara hesitated. Yes, in the fog. She was dressed like my lady, but taller. Walked heavy like a man. A double, Jap muttered. Poirot nodded. And the missing pages of the diary? Clara's eyes widened. She gave them to me. Said to keep them until she sent for them. But they were stolen yesterday. Someone broke into my room. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, the plot thickens. You will come with us, mademoiselle. You are no longer safe here. Back at the flat, Poirot laid the fragments on the table. The diary, the brooch, the ticket, the movement orders. Clara sat trembling by the fire. Jap paced like a caged lion. We've got a name, a missing heiress, a poet with no alibi, and an uncle with a motive, Jap said, but we're no closer to finding her. Poirot stroked his mustache. No, but we are closer to understanding the method. Listen. A false ticket to Dover. A freight car moved to a private siding. A ship waiting at the river. Constance disappears, leaving behind her glove and case. Her double is seen at the yard. Her diary pages vanish. All arranged by someone with money, influence, and knowledge of shipping. Bangbridge, Jap repeated. Perhaps. But why leave the brooch, his wife's brooch, hidden? Its shoulder remained. A hand with a distinctive signet ring. He thought of the ship's wheel above the mantel, the plaque reading SS Constance. He thought of the brooch, shaped like an anchor. Slowly a picture began to form. A network of ships, moorings, and false names. A plot built on deception and doubles. A young woman who might be prisoner or architect. Poirot closed his eyes. Little gray cells, he whispered. Work for me now. We are so near. The clock struck midnight. Poirot opened his eyes, sharp and clear. Tomorrow would bring answers. But tonight the city held its breath, waiting. Chapter 6. The Man Called Grey. Sir Edward Bainbridge's townhouse stood on a quiet street near Lincoln's Inn Fields, a world away from the grime of the railway yard and the poet's cluttered loft. It was a stately Georgian building with brass knockers shaped like lions' heads and windows polished to a mirror sheen.
At 9:30 in the morning, the fog still lingered, wrapping the street in a soft, silvery gloom. Poirot adjusted his bowler hat and glanced up at the facade. "Another stage, another actor," he murmured. Jap grunted. "Let's hope this one talks." They were shown into a drawing room heavy with damask curtains and oriental carpets. The scent of polished wood and lavender hung in the air. Over the fireplace hung a painting of a ship at sea, sails taut, prow cutting through a dark wave, with the name Vigilant painted on its hull. Beneath it sat Sir Edward Bainbridge himself. He was a big man, powerfully built despite his years, with a square jaw and eyes like pale ice. He wore a morning coat that fit too tightly across his shoulders, as though his body still remembered another life, perhaps hauling ropes on a deck. His hands were large and rough, the nails square-cut, but the signet ring on his right hand glinted with wealth. "Messrs. Poirot and Jap," he said in a voice like gravel. "To what do I owe this pleasure?" Lady Constance Gresham entered. Tall, elegant, with a pale face framed by dark hair. She wore a house coat of dove-gray silk. Her eyes flicked from Bainbridge to Poirot, and in that moment Poirot saw something like fear flicker there. "Forgive me," she said softly. "I heard voices." "My wife, Evelyn," Bainbridge said stiffly. Poirot rose and bowed. "Madam, it is an honor. We have been most intrigued by your brooch." Her hand went to her throat. "My brooch?" "Yes, the silver anchor." Her lips parted, then closed. "I lost it weeks ago." "Ah," Poirot murmured. "Then someone has found it, and used it." Bainbridge stood abruptly. "That's enough." But Lady Bainbridge stepped forward. "Edward, please. They're only trying to help." She turned to Poirot. "I warned her," she whispered. "I told Constance she was in danger." Bainbridge's head snapped around. "Evelyn!" She drew herself up. "I won't be silent. Not when a girl's life may be at stake." Poirot inclined his head. "You are most courageous, madam. Perhaps you can tell us. Who is the man called Gray?" The color drained from her face. "Gray?" "Yes," Poirot said gently. "He bribed Monsieur Morel. He arranged the freight car. He may have arranged much more." She glanced at her husband. He stared back stone-faced. "I don't know," she whispered. "But I think he is one of them." "One of whom?" She hesitated. "The shipping men. Alfred's associates. Edward, too, once. Gray isn't his real name. It's a mask." "Whose mask?" "I don't know," she cried. "Only that Constance had evidence, documents. She said she'd bring them to the railway yard. After that..." Bainbridge seized her arm. "Evelyn, enough." Poirot rose. "Sir Edward bears." He stirred his tea slowly. "We must draw him out, force him into the light." That afternoon, Poirot arranged a small trap. He telephoned Gresham House and asked Lord Alfred to host a meeting of interested parties that evening, a gathering ostensibly to discuss Constance's ransom note, which Poirot himself drafted in careful imitation of the perfume-scented paper.
He instructed Lord Alfred to invite Sir Edward Bainbridge, Lady Bainbridge, Julian Morel, and Clara Smythe as witnesses. Poirot would of course attend as well. "Let them all come," he told Jap, "and let our Mr. Gray come too. He will not resist." By nightfall, the great drawing room of Gresham House was lit with crystal lamps. Heavy curtains shut out the street. A fire crackled in the hearth. Around the long table sat Lord Alfred at the head, his expression grim. Sir Edward Bainbridge beside him, glowering. Lady Bainbridge pale but composed. Julian Morel tense and silent. Clara Smythe trembling. Jap at the door like a sentry. Poirot stood at the mantel, the supposed ransom note in his hand. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "you are all here because you care about Lady Constance, or at least you care about what becomes of her fortune. This note arrived today." He read aloud the words he had written. "If you value Lady Constance's life, deposit £50,000 at the West Side Railway Yard. Signed, Gray." Gasps around the table. Lord Alfred slammed his fist down. "Extortion! Who dares?" Poirot raised a hand. "Calm yourselves. This note is not from Gray. It is from me." "What?" Jap barked. Poirot's eyes moved over them. "It is a test, to see who would betray themselves." Sir Edward Bainbridge half rose from his chair. "This is outrageous." Poirot's gaze pinned him. "Sit down, sir." Lady Bainbridge's hand flew to her throat. Julian Morel's knuckles whitened on the table edge. Only Lord Alfred managed a cold smile. And now," Poirot said softly, "we wait." They did not have to wait long. Thing. "And that is?" Poirot's mustache bristled. "The small, the trivial, the smell of a perfume, the scratch of a photograph, the color of your suit. Always gray, always in between. You are the clerk from Bainbridge's office, Thomas Grayley." A flicker of surprise crossed the man's face. "Clever," he said softly. "Clever enough to know you are also Lord Alfred's fixer," Poirot continued. "You handled his private moorings, his secret shipments, his payments to dockside informants. You know every movement of every ship." Lord Alfred surged to his feet. "This is nonsense!" But Grayley, only smiled. "And if it were true?" Poirot stepped closer. "Then you have kidnapped Lady Constance to silence her. But you are too late. She left behind clues you did not see. She is alive, and you will tell us where she is." Grayley's eyes glinted. "And if I don't?" Jap moved forward, hand on his revolver. "Then you hang, mate." The room held its breath. Grayley looked at Lady Bainbridge. She stared back, trembling. He looked at Lord Alfred. Alfred's face was carved from stone. Then Grayley's shoulders sagged. "She's at the river," he muttered. "An old warehouse near Wapping. But you'll be too late. She's set to sail tonight." Poirot turned to Jap. "Go, now. Take men. Save her." Jap was already moving, signaling 2 constables waiting outside. "Come on," he barked. Poirot remained. "And you, Grayley, will stay with me until the police return." Grayley sat, eyes empty. "She was going to ruin them all," he said softly. "She didn't know what she was up against." Poirot's gaze was cold. "And now you know what you are up against." After Jap and his men had gone, the drawing room seemed to shrink, the silence thick as velvet. Lord Alfred poured himself a drink with a hand that trembled slightly.
Sir Edward Bainbridge stared into the fire. Lady Bainbridge to his men. He said an old warehouse near the river. No mistakes. They turned down a narrow lane where the buildings loomed on either side like black cliffs. Ahead, the low thunder of the river filled the air. A faint glow spilled from a window high above, then vanished. "That'll be it," Jap growled. The warehouse squatted at the water's edge, its brick walls damp and crumbling, its windows boarded but for a few slats. An ancient crane jutted out over the quay, its rusted hook swaying gently in the mist. Jap signaled. 2 constables slipped to the back to cover the rear door. He crept forward, pressing his ear to the wood. Voices inside, muffled. A woman's cry. He glanced at Sergeant Miller. On 3. They crashed in together, splintering the door. Inside, the air smelled of hemp and brine. Wooden crates towered to the ceiling. Lantern light flickered on the wet floor. At the center of the room stood Lady Constance Gresham, her wrists bound but her head held high, a strip of cloth around her mouth. 2 rough men were shoving her toward a trap door that opened onto the quay below. "Police!" Jap bellowed. "Stand where you are!" One man bolted for the rear. Miller tackled him before he made it 3 steps. The other drew a knife, but Jap's revolver snapped up. "Drop it or I'll drop you." The knife clattered to the floor. Lady Constance gave a muffled cry. Jap hurried to her, cutting the ropes with his own pocket knife. "Easy, milady. You're safe now." Her eyes blazed over the gag. When he pulled it free, she gasped. "Not safe. Not yet. The ship." "What ship?" "The Vigilant. They're taking the papers on the Vigilant. If it sails, everything's lost." Jap's head whipped around. "Miller? Sir? Get a man to the harbor master now. No vessel leaves without my say-so." He turned back to Constance. "Where's the ship?" "Private mooring downstream," she said breathlessly. "Lord Alfred's." Jap's jaw clenched. "Thought as much." Back at Gresham House, Poirot stood at the window of the drawing room, his fingers steepled, watching the evidence of your dealings and Bainbridge's. If it sails, the fortune is safe for you and lost for her. Bainbridge's head snapped up. "This is absurd." "Is it?" Poirot asked. "You deny you had business through that ship? Smuggling? Perhaps more?" Alfred ground out his cigarette. "You've no proof." "Ah," Poirot said gently. "But proof will arrive with the lady herself." As if on cue, the telephone rang. Poirot lifted the receiver. "Oui?" Jap's voice crackled down the line. "We've got her, Poirot. Constance is safe. But she says the papers are on the Vigilant at Alfred's private mooring." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Then stop it, mon ami. No ship sails tonight. I'm on it." Poirot replaced the receiver and turned back. "It is over," he said quietly. "For some of you, the end will be unpleasant." Down by the river, Jap had commandeered a launch from the harbor master and was pounding downstream through the fog, Constance seated beside him, a blanket around her shoulders. Sergeant Miller and 2 constables crouched at the prow, revolvers ready. "Show me," Jap barked. Constance pointed ahead. "There, between the pilings. That's his mooring." Through the mist loomed the silhouette of a small steamship, black hull gleaming wet, her name painted in white. Vigilant. Smoke curled from her funnel. "She's warming up," Miller muttered. Jap cupped his hands. "Police! Cut your engines!" The ship gave no sign. Instead, a figure darted on deck, throwing off the mooring lines. "Blast it," Jap swore. "They're trying to run." He swung the launch alongside, leapt for the rope ladder and hauled himself up. Miller and the constables followed. Constance stayed below, teeth chattering.
On deck, the air was thick with steam. Crates were lashed to the railing. A man with a revolver appeared from behind a winch. Jap dropped behind a crate as a shot rang out. Miller fired back. The man cried out and fell. Another lunged from the wheelhouse with a club, but a constable broke.
Be no escape. Alfred turned, his face hard. We'll see about that. On the Vigilant, Jap and his men were searching the hold. Lantern light gleamed on barrels and crates stenciled with false names. Constance had insisted on coming aboard now, her blanket thrown aside, her eyes bright with fury. "There," she said, pointing to a sealed crate. "That's where he told me they'd be hidden." Miller pried it open with a crowbar. Inside lay bundles of papers, ledgers, and envelopes sealed with wax. Jap whistled softly. "That enough evidence for you, milady?" "It's everything," she said. "Shipping manifests, bribes, routes. Enough to send them all to prison." Jap closed the crate again. "Then let's take it in. This ship and all aboard her are under police control." It was past midnight when the launch returned to Gresham House, towing the Vigilant. Constance stepped ashore first, straightening her coat. Poirot was waiting in the doorway. "Mademoiselle," he said with a small bow, "it is a pleasure to see you alive." "Thanks to you, Monsieur Poirot," she said warmly, "and Inspector Jap." "Ah, but thanks to yourself also," Poirot murmured. "Your courage saved you." Jap followed with Miller, 2 constables, and the crate of documents. "Got it all," he said grimly. "No getting out of this one." Inside the drawing room, Lord Alfred stood frozen as Constance entered, her chin high. "You," she said softly. "You thought you could buy me off, frighten me, make me vanish. You underestimated me, Father." There was a collective gasp. Poirot's eyes glittered. "At last, the truth. Lady Constance Gresham, or should I say Miss Constance Bainbridge? You are his daughter, n'est-ce pas?" Constance's gaze did not waver. "He kept it secret for years, paid my mother to disappear, but I found out. And when I saw the corruption, the smuggling, the bribery, I couldn't stay silent." Lord Alfred's face went gray. "You ungrateful little. Some will go to prison. Some perhaps not. But the truth, mademoiselle, the truth will be known." Jap poured himself a cup of coffee from a silver pot. "And you'll get your inheritance back, I expect." "I don't care about the money," she said. "I care about justice." Poirot inclined his head. "Then you and I are allies." Outside, the first faint light of dawn began to soften the fog. The city was waking. Poirot rose, smoothing his mustache. "A case like this," he murmured. "It is like the Thames itself. Murky, twisting, but always flowing to the sea." He turned to Constance. "Now, mademoiselle, you must rest. And then, if you will permit, we shall reconstruct the crime, so that every point is clear." She nodded. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot." He smiled faintly. "Bon. For the little gray cells, they too must rest before their final effort." Chapter 8. The Drawing Room Reconstruction. The fog had thinned by morning, but the heavy curtains at Gresham House remained drawn. The drawing room was set exactly as Poirot had arranged the night before.
Chairs formed a semicircle around the fire. A small table stood at the center with the brooch, a stack of ledgers, and a faded, perfume-scented diary page carefully laid out like trophies of war. A faint scent of coffee drifted from the hallway, but otherwise the house was silent. At 10 o'clock precisely, Poirot entered, his shoes polished, his tie immaculate, his mustache waxed to perfect points. Behind him came Inspector Japp, notebook ready. Lady Constance sat nearest the fire, pale but composed, hands folded. Lady Bainbridge sat opposite, her eyes downcast. Clara Smythe had been persuaded to attend, trembling slightly. And at the far end, under the watch of two plainclothes constables, sat Lord Alfred and Sir Edward Bainbridge. Poirot took his position at the center, facing them. Mesdames et Grey. Grayley sat motionless, eyes on the floor. Into this world, Poirot continued, came a young woman, the illegitimate daughter of Lord Alfred and a woman named Margaret Gresham. She grew up as Constance Bainbridge, thinking herself the daughter of Sir Edward and Lady Bainbridge. Only later did she learn the truth, that her real father was Lord Alfred, and that the wealth she enjoyed came partly from criminal enterprise. She had a conscience, cette jeune fille. She began to keep a diary, noting shipments, names, dates. She even found a way to copy documents from her father's desk. When she confronted Lord Alfred, he dismissed her. When she hinted to Sir Edward, he threatened her. But she was not easily silenced. He looked at Constance. Her chin trembled, but she nodded. Then, Poirot said softly, she went to Julian Morel, the poet who once courted her, thinking to use him as a messenger to Scotland Yard. But Monsieur Morel was weak. He betrayed her for money from Grey. Julian Morel flinched. Thus, Poirot went on, the plot to silence Lady Constance was formed. They could not kill her outright, too dangerous. Instead, they would stage a disappearance. The West Side Railway Yard was chosen as the place. A freight car was prepared with a hidden compartment. Constance was lured there under the pretense of a meeting. She was drugged, placed in the compartment, and transported to a riverside warehouse. From there she was to be taken aboard the Vigilant and sent abroad, perhaps to the continent, where she could be kept or killed quietly. Her diary pages and stolen documents were hidden on the ship as well, to be destroyed later. He lifted the brooch. But one person tried to save her. Lady Bainbridge. All eyes turned to Evelyn Bainbridge. She sat very still. She knew, Poirot said gently, what her husband and Lord Alfred were planning. She warned Constance. She gave her this brooch as a sign, slowly. I've told them everything, he said hoarsely. No point now. Alfred stared at him. You traitor. You paid me to do your dirty work, Grayley muttered. You never paid me enough to hang for it. Sir Edward shifted in his seat, face ashen. You can't put this on me alone, he said thickly. He pointed at Alfred. You started it. You dragged me in. Poirot raised a hand. Messieurs, the court will decide. My task is only to reveal the truth. He turned now to the evidence table. One more detail, mes amis. Why the freight car? Why not simply abduct her from her home? Because the railway yard is a place of noise,
confusion, many hands. A hidden compartment in a freight car can pass unnoticed, where a carriage cannot. And because Monsieur Morel was known there, he could provide access. That is why Constance's last known whereabouts were the West Side Railway Yard. He looked at Julian Morel. Monsieur, you took the bribe, but you did not expect them to go so far, no? Morel's lips trembled. I thought they'd frighten her. That's all. Poirot's mustache bristled. You thought wrong. He turned to Constance. And you, mademoiselle, you were brave. You left clues, the brooch, the missing diary pages. Without them, we might have been too late. She gave a faint smile. I had to try. Poirot inclined his head, and thus justice is served. You are not merely an heiress, but a witness. Japp closed his notebook with a snap. I've enough here for half the Old Bailey. Poirot spread his hands. Then, my friend, I leave it to you. The mystery is no longer mine. He turned to the group. Messieurs, mesdames, you have heard the reconstruction. If any wish to confess, now is the time. Otherwise, the police will do their work. No one spoke. Alfred sounds. No one spoke. Alfred sat rigid, jaw
Broken. Your inheritance, or rather your rightful share of your father's estate, will be restored. More important, the truth will be known. I don't care about the money, she said. I care that no one else is hurt. Poirot nodded. Then you are richer than you think. They stood in silence a moment, watching the sunlight glint on the river beyond the rooftops. When Japp returned from the hallway, he was shrugging into his coat. I'll be off, Poirot. Paperwork the size of a mountain. Poirot smiled. Ah, mon cher Japp, you have the patience of Job. Patience? Ha! More like stubbornness. He turned to Constance. You were lucky, miss. Another hour and that ship would have been halfway to Antwerp. I know, she said. I'll never forget it. He nodded. Good luck to you. When he was gone, Poirot turned back to the fire. The logs had burned down to embers. This case, he said softly, was like a ship itself, leaving a wake of lies, but in the end coming home to port. Constance tilted her head. Do you always talk like that? Poirot chuckled. Only when I am satisfied. A servant entered, bearing a silver tray with tea. Poirot took a cup, savoring the aroma. Ah, he said. The end of a case is like the first sip of tea. One feels the warmth after the storm. Constance sat opposite him. You must think me naive, she said. On the contrary, you are brave and clever. Few would risk what you risked. She looked down. I didn't know who to trust. That is the difficulty, Poirot said. In such cases, there are always many masks. But remember, mademoiselle, the truth has a way of shining through, like the sun through fog. She smiled faintly. What will you do now? He spread his hands. Another case, perhaps? Or perhaps And for a moment the famous detective looked almost paternal. Bon, he said softly. Then let us have our tea.
Chapter 9. The Scales of Justice. The Old Bailey was a cathedral of shadows. Its high windows let in pale January light, cold as steel, while the echo of footsteps rang like muted bells. Constance Bainbridge stood just outside courtroom number 3, hands clasped tightly in front of her, a pale blue veil shading her face. For weeks she had hidden herself away at a small country estate lent by a friend of Lady Bainbridge's. Now she had returned to London for the trial, drawn as much by duty as by the strange need to see her father and his co-conspirators face the reckoning she had once feared would never come. Inside the courtroom, wooden benches creaked under the weight of spectators. Reporters huddled together like a flock of crows, pencils poised. The air smelled of damp coats and ink. Above the judge's bench hung the great royal crest, a lion and a unicorn glaring down at the accused. Poirot sat in the second row behind the prosecution's table, immaculate as ever, gloved hands folded over his cane. Inspector Japp leaned beside him, muttering notes to a clerk. Lady Bainbridge was not present. Her statement had been given in private to spare her public humiliation. Clara Smythe had vanished from society altogether, her name appearing only in a single gossip column as a maid of interest. Julian Morel sat with his solicitor, pale and wan, prepared to testify as a cooperating witness. Constance glanced once at Poirot. He gave her a tiny nod, not comfort exactly, but steadiness, like a metronome in a storm. The judge entered. "Silence!" cried the clerk. Everyone rose. The trial began. The Crown opened with a meticulous outline of the conspiracy: smuggling operations aboard the Vigilant, the laundering of profits through front companies, the silencing of an inconvenient heir. Ledgers were presented, signatures circled in red wax. The hidden compartment in the freight car on the edge of a table, staring at the reflection of her veil in a darkened window. "It is harder than you expected?" Poirot's voice came behind her. She turned. "I thought I'd feel relief," she whispered. "Instead, it feels like a funeral. And I'm not sure whose." Poirot stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You grieved not only for what they did, but for what they were, or what you believed them to be. That is natural." "They're monsters," she said fiercely. "I should hate them." He raised an eyebrow. "You can hate the crime, mademoiselle, without hating the person. But that is your choice. Justice is not vengeance. It is merely order restored." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "Order. I wonder if there will ever be order again." Poirot's mustache twitched. "With time," he said softly. "With time." The bailiff's knock ended the moment. Constance drew herself up, adjusted her veil, and returned to the courtroom. The defense argued desperation, misunderstanding, even paternal concern, claiming Alfred only meant to send Constance abroad for her own safety. Sir Edward's counsel painted him as a weak man led astray by a stronger will. But each argument crumbled under evidence. The chloroform vial bearing Alfred's initials, the secret bank accounts, the coded telegrams to Antwerp. The brooch glittered under the courtroom lights like a silent witness. On the third day, Lady Bainbridge's deposition was read aloud. Her voice, recorded by a stenographer, filled the courtroom with a quiet dignity. She had warned Constance.
She had begged her husband to stop. She had even tried to pay Gray to smuggle Constance out of the country safely rather than harm her. But the machine of greed had rolled on. Her testimony sealed the case. When the prosecution rested, the defense called no further witnesses. The jury filed out, faces drawn. During the wait for the verdict, Constance and Poirot walked slowly along the stone corridor outside. Gaslights hissed. The city beyond the high windows was a gray blur of drizzle appeared at the end of the hall.
"Verdict's in," he called. Back inside, the jury filed in. The foreman rose. The hush was absolute. "On the charge of conspiracy to abduct," he intoned, "we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of attempted murder, guilty. On the charge of smuggling and illegal shipment of goods, guilty." Lord Alfred closed his eyes. Sir Edward sagged forward. Grayley muttered something under his breath. The judge pronounced sentence. 20 years hard labor for Alfred and Edward, 15 for Grayley. Julian Morel received 2 years, suspended for cooperation. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Constance sat very still, her hands folded, her face hidden by her veil. Poirot watched her, but said nothing. Afterward, outside the courthouse, the press swarmed. "Lady Constance, will you testify further? Will you claim your inheritance? Will you—" Flashbulbs popped. She flinched. Poirot stepped forward, his presence like a curtain, and guided her toward a waiting motor car. "Pardon, mesdames et messieurs," he said smoothly. "No statements at this time." Inside the car, Constance let out a long breath. "It's over," she whispered. Poirot shook his head. "It is never entirely over. But the worst is past." She stared out at the gray streets sliding by. "I thought I'd feel triumphant. Instead, I feel empty." "That too is natural," Poirot said softly. "Justice restores balance, but it cannot restore innocence." Back at the small estate where she was staying, Constance sat by a window overlooking a frozen garden. Snow clung to the hedges. A single blackbird pecked at the frost. She felt as though she were floating, unmoored. Letters of sympathy arrived by the dozen. Solicitors wrote about estates, trusts, inheritances. She ignored them all. Poirot visited once a week. He brought no case file. After winter, Constance found herself smiling. "Perhaps you're right." Months passed. The newspapers moved on. The vigilant was seized by the Crown. A blue plaque appeared at West Side Railway Yard commemorating the exposure of a smuggling conspiracy by Hercule Poirot. Constance attended the small ceremony incognito, her veil now a soft gray rather than morning black. She watched as children played nearby, their laughter echoing against the iron rails. She thought of the night she had been hidden there, the rattle of wheels, the darkness. And she thought of Poirot, standing in that same spot with his neat notebook, piecing together the fragments of her life. Later that evening, she wrote in a new diary, her first since the ordeal. "I am alive. I am free. My name is Constance Bainbridge, and I am more than the daughter of men's crimes. The fog is lifting." She closed the book, feeling the weight of it, and for the first time did not feel fear. Poirot read her note weeks later when she sent it with a thank you card. He smiled, folded it neatly, and tucked it into a small drawer of his desk where he kept mementos of cases. Outside his window, the London street buzzed with life. Another puzzle awaited somewhere, but for now he allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. "Order," he murmured to himself. "Order restored." The fog over London slowly dispersed. Spring sunlight caught the Thames, turning it silver. The bells of St. Paul's tolled the hour. Somewhere a train whistled, not a freight car of secrets this time, but an ordinary passenger train carrying ordinary lives forward. Constance Bainbridge stood on a balcony above the street, watching the city move. She took a deep breath. Her past would always be with her, but it no longer defined her. The scales of justice had tipped, and now, at last, she felt something like peace. Chapter 10. The last page of the diary. The air at King's Cross was bright with late spring. Trains hissed and sighed under the glass canopy. Sunlight fell in pale columns through soot street.
Carriage. The carriage smelled of polished wood and steam. Across from him sat Constance Bainbridge, her dark hair pinned back beneath a simple hat. Gone was the veil, gone the fragile pallor. She wore a dove-gray traveling suit with a pale lilac scarf. She looked, Poirot thought, like someone emerging from a winter of convalescence into her first clear spring day. "You came," she said softly when he entered. "But of course." Poirot settled into the seat opposite. "You did not think Hercule Poirot would let you go off alone without a proper au revoir?" She smiled faintly. "I should have known." The train lurched forward. Outside, the station walls gave way to soot-colored terraces, then to green fields dotted with lambs. A thin mist rose from the hedgerows, dissolving in the sun. "I read your letter," Poirot said after a moment. "About the foundation." Her eyes brightened. "Yes, it's all arranged. Lady Bainbridge has put some of her jewels toward it. We're calling it the Anchor Trust, after the brooch. It will fund shelters and legal aid for women caught in trafficking or exploitation. The first offices open in June. Poirot inclined his head. "Une belle chose, mademoiselle. You take the symbol of your suffering and transform it into hope for others." "It feels like something I can control," she admitted. "After so much that I couldn't." "Control," Poirot said softly. "Yes, it is what all of us seek, in our way. Some through crime, some through justice, some through charity. You choose the third. Bravo." She looked out the window. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing it for them or for me. To feel clean again." He smiled gently. "It can be both." They rode in silence for a while, the rhythm of the wheels like a heartbeat. Constance traced her finger along the window glass. "I still dream of the freight car sometimes," she said at last. "The darkness. The sound builds something new." She met his eyes. "You really believe people can change?" "I believe," he said slowly, "that people can choose, and that is enough." They took lunch in the dining car. Cucumber sandwiches, a slice of sponge cake, tea poured from a silver pot. Poirot admired the symmetry of the table setting.
Constance admired the countryside unfurling beyond the window. At one point, she said quietly, "Do you think my father hates me?" Poirot set down his teacup. "He is a proud man who has been unmasked. In such men, hatred is often only shame turned outward." "I don't want him to hate me," she said. "I don't want to hate him." Poirot nodded. "Then you will not. That is your freedom." She looked down at her plate. "I suppose forgiveness is another kind of control." "Exactement." By mid-afternoon, the train rolled through open moorland. The sky was a vast silver bowl. Constance took a small leather notebook from her bag and opened it. "I've started writing again," she said. "It helps me think." Poirot smiled. "Ah, the new diary. And what will this one hold?" "Not evidence," she said. "Stories, plans, thoughts. Maybe someday I'll publish." "You will call it the Anchor Diaries, perhaps?" She laughed. "Perhaps." She wrote a line, then looked up. "You know, in all the testimony, all the questions, no one ever asked me why I went to the railway yard that night. Not really." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And why did you?" "Because part of me still hoped my father would meet me there himself," she said softly. "Not to harm me, but to explain. To say it wasn't true. I thought if I went, he'd choose me over the smuggling, over everything." Poirot's eyes softened. "Ah, the child's hope." "Yes." She closed the notebook. "That night it died. But something else was born, I think. Something harder. Maybe
Gray figure vanishing into the crowd like a thread drawn through fabric. He felt a curious lightness, the rare satisfaction not only of a puzzle solved, but of a life saved, perhaps even redeemed. That night in his hotel room in Edinburgh, Poirot took out her envelope. Inside was a single page torn from her new diary. In her clear script it read, "To Hercule Poirot, who found me in the dark and showed me the way out. May the little gray cells never tire, and may your heart remain as precise as your mind. Constance Bainbridge." Below the words was a small drawing of an anchor. Poirot smiled. He placed the page in his keepsake drawer beside a pressed sprig of lavender from another case, a theater ticket from yet another. He closed it gently. Then he sat at his small writing desk, opened his own journal and wrote, "Case of the Vanishing Heiress of West Side Railway Yard concluded. Justice served. Victim recovered. No fatalities. Collateral damage. The illusions of a daughter. Result: order restored." He underlined the last words, then put down his pen. Outside, the city hummed. Poirot leaned back, hands folded over his stomach, eyes half closed. In his mind's eye he saw again the railway yard, the fog, the brooch glinting on the floor of the freight car. He saw the drawing room at Gresham House, the faces of the guilty and the innocent. And then he saw Constance as she had been on the train, sunlight on her hair, a new diary in her lap. A small smile curved his lips. "Bon," he murmured. "Another case finished. Another soul restored to the light." He turned off the lamp. In the darkness, the city's noises softened, like the ticking of a clock in a quiet room. Somewhere beyond the window, a train whistle blew.
not ominous now but bright, carrying lives forward into the future. Poirot lay back and let the sound wash over him. For a moment, just a moment, even the little gray cells were at rest.